Hello and welcome to my video, Classic FM Synthesis on the Novation Peak. So what I've noticed is that there are a number of dedicated FM synthesizers, the DX7 being an extremely famous example, but also things like the Volca FM, the Preen FM, the Liven XFM. And those implement FM in a certain way, but a number of other synthesizers like the Microfreak and the Peak also mention having FM features. We also hear about a feature called cross-modulation, where the frequency of one oscillator is modulated by the frequency of another. So what I wanted to talk about is why this is not the same as traditional FM synthesis, and how on some of these synthesizers you can achieve some of the traditional FM synth sounds. So firstly, with respect to cross-modulation, traditional FM is called linear FM. What that means is that the value of one oscillator applies linearly to the frequency of the other oscillator. It doesn't apply to the musical note, which is referred to as exponential FM. The reason this is important is linear FM produces harmonic content when the oscillator modulating the other is a harmonic. The output will also be integer harmonics. Exponential FM doesn't retain that relationship, so exponential FM produces lots of inharmonics. So cross-modulation typically is exponential FM, which is not like traditional FM. But now what I want to talk about is why a synthesizer like the Peak is quite different from a traditional FM synth. So let's firstly have a look at the panel. An initialized patch. We have 3 oscillators, and in the mod matrix we have access to a number of FM routings, specifically FM from oscillator 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 1, noise source to 1, 3 to filter, noise source to filter. So this effectively limits the topology or connectivity, also known as algorithm, that can be used when defining an FM sound. I collected it in a quick diagram here. So in the top right is a table. On the left are the sources, and across the top are the destinations. So in other words, operator 1 can modulate operator 2, 2 can modulate 3, 3 can modulate 1. All of those oscillators can output to the mixer, as can the noise source. The noise source can also modulate oscillator 1 and the filter, and oscillator 3 can also modulate the filter. So this gives us access to a number of FM topologies. So I've illustrated some here, the simplest being the one in the middle bottom. Oscillator 1, 2 and 3, none of them modulating one another. So what does this correspond to? Non-FM synthesis use. We have a deeper synthesis chain in the middle upper. Oscillator 1 modulates oscillator 2, modulates oscillator 3. We have the noise source which can be involved, we have the filter which can be involved. So there are a number of configurations, and note that all of the oscillators and the noise source can also output to the mixer as well as being modulation sources. So we are simultaneously acting as what is known as a carrier and a modulator in each of these cases. The thing which limits, and also the other side which benefits, one limiting element is in a traditional FM synthesizer, each oscillator has a dedicated envelope. This envelope, where it is a carrier, applies to the volume that it reaches the mixer at. Where the operator is a modulator, that envelope adjusts the intensity of modulation. So this allows us to have movement in timbre by enveloping. So what we're going to do to make this work on the Peak is we're going to use the modulation matrix to provide some similar routings. So first let's decide on a configuration of the oscillators that we're going to use. I'm thinking the one in the bottom left might be interesting. So oscillator 1 is going to modulate 2, and oscillator 3 is going to be on its own. The benefit, which I didn't actually mention then, is traditional FM is between sine waves. on the peak in particular, you're not limited to sine waves for your modulation sources, primarily because it generates sound at 24 megahertz. So you can do true FM modulation, and also the wavetables, and I believe the other oscillators are implemented in the spectral domain. So this gives us benefits in the way that we can do FM calculation. So without further ado, let's get to it. So what I'm thinking here then is, if we want oscillator 1 to modulate oscillator 2, oscillator 2 is going to be the main oscillator we listen to. So let's start with sine waves for simplicity. So oscillator 2, turn down oscillator 1, turn down the noise. So we have a plain sound. Now what we want to do is frequency modulate that sound with another sound. So, mod matrix, routing from oscillator 1 to oscillator 2, both sine waves, both the same pitch. So you can hear that we have a more interesting timbre, but it's retained its original tuning. Let's experiment by adjusting the tuning of this. Okay, so now we can hear that oscillator 2 sounds quite different because it is being frequency modulated by oscillator 1. But what we would like to do here is we would like to animate that modulation. So the way that we're going to animate it is we're going to use one of the mod envelopes. This synthesizer has 3 envelopes, an amplitude envelope, 2 modulation envelopes, but it also has 2 per voice LFOs, which can be set to key trigger and to repeat only once. So they can actually be used as additional envelopes if we need them. In any case, let's look at mod envelope 2. Let's make a very simple plucky shape. And now, instead of directly sending oscillator 1 to 2, I'm going to use mod envelope 2. So I think you can already hear now we have something of an FM tone going on with relatively little work. If we wanted additionally to have oscillator 1 actually sound a little bit, we could try turning it up. So now we can hear some of oscillator 1. Another thing that we could do is we could include some of this with the envelope modulation. So what does that mean? Oscillator 1 level from mod envelope 2. Oops, sorry, mod envelope 2. It's quite interesting. Now let's say that instead of just having this as a flat modulation, I want to introduce some velocity sensitivity. Now, on a traditional FM synth, what you'd usually be able to do is set the velocity sensitivity independent of the envelope. So in order to do that here, I'd need to make 2 modulation slots. I'd need to make 1 modulation slot with mod env 2 and direct, with some certain depth of modulation, and then I would make a second one which includes mod envelope 2 plus velocity, which would be the velocity sensitive portion. In this case, I'm going to allow it all to be velocity sensitive. I might take this a little further at the extreme. So at the moment, the amp envelope is basically a gate. I'm going to change its shape. So I hope you can already hear that we have something of a sort of FM key sound going on with a very, very basic configuration. I'm going to introduce the third oscillator, and I'm going to use that to be a sort of transient. So I'm going to use, let's see, I'm going to use one of the LFOs to function as that. So LFO2, I'm going to go to LFO2. I'm going to set its phase to 0. What that means is every time a key triggers, its oscillation is going to return. So notice every time I click, it goes darker, so that means that I'm re-triggering. What I can also do is in repeats, I can set a number of repeats. I can set it to 1. So if I play a note, notice that it faded in, it faded out, and it's remained faded out. Now let me set, there's a rate. So you see now this is a little transient, it's rising and falling. So I'm going to apply this now to the mixer level of oscillator 3. Notice 3 is turned down here, but I can go oscillator 3 level. I can get LFO2. In this case, I don't want bidirectional modulation. Why? Because a triangle wave is going to start below 0, go above 0, go below 0. Because I want an envelope, I only want positive modulation. So I'm going to use LFO2 positive. To make it obvious, I'm going to turn this down. So I've turned it up in register so I can hear it more clearly, and I'm also going to make this velocity sensitive. Now I'm going to turn. You may wonder why I didn't use mod envelope 1. That's because I'm intending to use it for the filter. At the moment, note that this sound, you could almost believe there's a filter in play here, but this is not utilizing the filter. So consider that I could use different envelope shapes, consider that I have access to more envelopes, but for now I'm going to go and maybe add a little noise. It reminds me a bit of a Rhodes piano. I feel like I'm going to turn this up too high, and then I'm going to dial it back. How am I going to dial it back? In the oscillator menu, I'm going to low pass filter it. So I added a little bit of drive. I'm going to add a little post-filter drive. Sounds pretty good. Now what I want is maybe a little bit more interest. So now I have an FM sound. I have an envelope modulating the amount of FM, and I have this other little plucky sound. Now I would like to make a little more velocity expression. I already have velocity expression here. You can hear that we have much more of that attack sound and much more of that timbre shift. But I would also like a little bit more distortion coming in when I play heavier, because when I think of Rhodes, I think of that distortion that comes in. So let's say we have what's called filter drive. So this will be the maximum level. Now I'm going to make that velocity sensitive. Maybe I did that a little much. Dial it back. So now I'm going to think about how I'm going to use the filter here. And I think I'm going to have the filter only being a very slight accent. For polyphonic sounds, I tend to like the 12 dB filter. And I'm going to use the mod envelope, which I haven't used mod envelope 1. I'm going to dial it in a lot. Now I'm going to shape it. So at the moment I have it much more open than the amp envelope, so it's not really curtailing the sound, but I'm going to test the... Okay, so now sounding pretty good. Now I'm going to look at filter tracking. In particular, FM sounds can be very, very bright in the high registers, so I'm going to go up. That is extremely bright, so I'm going to turn filter tracking down. What that's going to mean is the higher keys will now have the filter closed a bit more. Normally the filter opens up here. So notice in the middle register you almost hear no difference. Another thing that I might like, this little transient on oscillator 3, I might like it to become shorter in the higher register. So how would I do that? Let's say I would like the keyboard to modulate the rate of LFO2. So let's start with direct, and I'm going to try and just listen to it on its own approximately. Now I'm going to make that keyboard dependent. Turn this back up. Okay. Since I've been going through a sound design process, I guess I'm going to go all the way into the effect section. I'm going to use the least complex chorus. I'm going to adjust the rate. Now turn down the level. Sounding nice. Let's get a little delay in. I've been quite enjoying the more lo-fi delays, so let's go for this quad lo-fi. What this means is though that the time, if I turn the time right up, I guess you heard how long that was. It was taking so long I adjusted it. Okay. Sounding pretty good. Let's add a little reverb, maybe the room reverb. I'm going to go too far. I'm going to dial it back. So. So let's jump back to my FM diagram, and I hope you can see that what I've done is implemented the algorithm that's on the bottom left. It's possible for me to add some more modulation, so maybe as an experiment I'll add a little bit of oscillator 3 modulating the filter. So I actually have a dedicated knob for this. I actually quite like how that sounds, but I think it should come in more at higher velocity. So what I'm going to do, set it to a very sort of moderate amount. Then I'm going to have oscillator 3 to the filter and set that velocity sensitive. So now So I hope this has illustrated a little bit of how you can employ classic FM strategies on a synthesizer that's not conventionally FM, but hopefully it also illustrates that these things are a little different in the way that they sound. Let me experiment with some different waveforms. So you can hear now this is something that's really very different to what you might get from an FM synthesizer, because I'm using triangle waves, saw waves, square waves. I can modulate those shapes and do all sorts of other things. But in any case, I think I've demonstrated what I set out to do. So it suffices to say thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you come back and watch more of my videos. But in any case, thank you and goodbye.